Good evening, Good Samaritan Church family, and anybody else that receives this or that it even helps later on. We just wanted to talk to you all a little bit tonight about running away versus running to God. Wanted to talk specifically about the examples of the wayward son, the prophet Jonah, and Job. These guys set a precedent for many of the things that we go through today, and a lot of the troubles that we face and how we face them. And I just wanted to hit on these guys a little bit and hopefully use their examples and their stories in the Bible to kind of encourage you on how to go about doing things. But I can give you a cheat sheet. It's to rely on God. But last week we mentioned how trouble doesn't last always, but it can if you never seek God and or ask for deliverance from him, as we said last week. We also mentioned how we need to intentionally and fervently ask for that deliverance while having the patience to wait, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, sometimes even months for that deliverance to come. And I know a lot of us have trouble waiting for anything nowadays because, as we said, this world has conditioned us to be kind of like a microwave generation where we want a lot of things instantly, but God doesn't work that way. And we all know that because we all know that sometimes we have plans, and more times than not, we have a plan, but God's plan is way different from ours. But just like in Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good of them that love God. So that doesn't say for God to serve us. It says that we love him and we wait on him, and we know that he will bring good things to us eventually if we follow him and wait on him. But yesterday, we also prayed about how we need to just simply ask him to help us and just direct us and keep us on the right path sometimes by simply just saying, God, help me. And all these things work well when looking at these three examples of the wayward son, Jonah, and Job. We know that sometimes we feel that we can do things on our own. We have our own thoughts. We have our own ideas. We have our own past. But sometimes we know that can get us in trouble. And also, I like to ask, what happens when you know what God would have for you, but you refuse? Because sometimes we have those things that God put in us in our hearts, but we want to go a different way. And I also want to ask, what happens when you stay the course that God has set you on? So much like many people today that choose to live their best life, the wayward son had his money and his inheritance and sought out everything his heart desired. He exercised no restraint, he exercised no repentance, and he had no worries that crossed his mind until his fun and his money had come to an end. Nothing was wrong until the things that sustained his joy were depleted and gone. Only then did he develop an ounce of repentance, albeit not to God, but to humble himself and return to his Father. And we know that God is our Father above all fathers, but sometimes people don't know to simply return to him. Many today aren't lucky enough to be able to return to their parents' home or start over or sometimes even survive this fun that they go seeking, because it can cost some people their lives when they get too lost or led astray or don't realize that the devil's waiting around the corner. Sometimes they contend that in their heart that everything that is transpired is by their efforts. But in Matthew 5:36, it states, and do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. And Galatians 6:3 states that if anyone thinks they have something when they are not, they deceive themselves. So, in all of the fun that people seek, even this year, with it being a new year, I pray that nobody thinks that they're doing it under their own power and that they have the strength to do anything, because without God, wages of sin are death. And all the things that you do without God are nothing but sin. So all of that fun will lead you to nothing but pain and suffering. So I at least encourage you to at least try to start a relationship with God. Or much like the wayward son, there's nothing but suffering at the end of the road. The prophet Jonah, much like many Christians, know God, but have trouble staying the course that God has called them or pushed them to do. Sometimes our faith works blindly in situations that God is still protecting us in and from. Although it's not quite the path you were set on, you can still learn and grow because God's still working in the background. Sometimes our hearts and heads can put blinders on us and cause us to go astray. But through God's patience and grace, we can be turned around again. But sometimes you have to remember to pray in whatever situation. Much like how I was saying yesterday, just pray God help you. And regardless of the situation, be it the morning, be it noon, be it night, be it getting up, be it going out, be it coming home, you don't know how many infinite things God will be doing in the background. So remember to continue to always seek and pray. And God can always help you, even through your roughest rides. And although we and many wrestle with things in our lives, Luke 16:13 states, "No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." Romans 6:16 also puts this in a different perspective. You do not know the one to whom you present yourselves as slaves for obedience. You are slaves of the same one whom you obey, either of sin resulting in death or obedience or resulting in righteousness. So, much like Jonah, the story of Jonah, it tells how although he was a prophet of God, he still had conflicts in his heart that made him run away from God. So much like many of us today, although we know God and we know the things that God would have us to do, mainly to be holy and seek righteousness, sometimes we fall astray and sometimes we fall off of that path. But these last two scriptures tell us clearly we can't do both. So if you love God and you know God, just try to trust in him more than anything. And that will keep us on the right path and help us to overcome anything that we have to worry with and deal with, much like our last part of this, which is Job. Job sets a precedence for how we should strive to be. Despite his losses, despite his troubles, despite his pain, despite his afflictions, his focus is and was on God, his sustainer. And although he had grief and worry, he never doubted or spoke ill about the one that brought him this far. So much like many of the things we go through today, with depression, with pain, with fear, with hurt, with death even in the families or from our loved ones, we should never speak ill or worry about what God has for us, because it's always for the good. But Job knew that God was able to restore him if he saw fit. And he also acknowledged in Job 1:21, "Naked came me out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gives, and the Lord will take away. Blessed be the name of the Lord," which should be a prayer that we should always recite in our hearts and in our head. Despite whatever troubles come our way, whatever situation it is, he brought us from heaven into this world. He kept us through, and he gave us so many good things, because all of us can remember at least one time in our life where we were able to smile. So we should not be, I don't even know of a word, because you can't really accuse God of anything. He gave you everything. But at some point, I know we all have a difficulty, or some people have difficulties in their hearts. But God will always bring us through, much like he did Job. If you're familiar with the story, you know that he wouldn't sin against God with his mouth. So let's strive to be like Job and try to remember example in all trials. We hurt, we mourn, we get depressed, and we miss this thing or this person or that person. But just know that God knows what's best for us today and every day, and he will sustain us and bring us through. And if we stay the course, he will even double our portion, much like he did with Job. We just have to have the patience and let him guide us to that point in our journey. So with that, I pray that these examples are a reminder of something that you've either been through or that down the road you may go through, because sometimes God puts things before us to prepare us for what we're going through. So whether your situation is like the wayward son who just went about enjoying his life, much like today people say YOLO or live your best life, or if your story is kind of like Jonah, where you're kind of on both sides of the fence, bouncing back and forth, trying to wrestle with what somebody's trying to pull you off to, or trying to go back to God, or find your way back with what God set you in at one time and you lost your way, or if you're like Job, just trying to fervently seek righteousness and holiness, I pray that you know that the end result and the end answer should always be seek God, ask God, pray to God, and let him guide you. And that's pretty well all I can say about it. If there's anything else that you need from this story, just put it in the comments or let me know, and we'll go more in depth. I will post these scriptures after we close this out, and hopefully it's a help to you or somebody in your life or in your family. Please feel free to share with anybody this week that may tell you of some form of trouble that they're having, because this may have been meant for them. So with that, I pray that you all receive it and that you all have a good night.